Hey everyone, it's Bilar, and in this video I want to talk to you about pathing in Act 1 in order to improve your Act 1 times through optimizing how we travel from zone to zone and when we do so. So when I am talking about pathing, really what I am talking about is the goal of trying to optimize our zone travel such that we are keeping a few considerations in mind that we want to find a balance with. First, we want to try and reduce the amount of times we return to town as much as possible. Second, we want to try and reduce unnecessary load screens where possible because load screens are just dead time. Third, we also want to make sure we're taking enough town trips to be able to sell and vendor items efficiently in order to generate currency for the various recipes / crafts we may need later in the run. Fourth, we want to make sure we are returning to town when appropriate to get power spikes through quest rewards such as skill points, skill gems, and also have the opportunity to actually do those crafts / recipes that will allow us to improve our speed overall versus what we would be able to do without having those power spikes available to us. Fifth, we also want to think about how our zone pathing choices will affect our XP. We want to make sure that we're able to maintain our XP as we're pathing through the act, so we don't have to go out of our way to XP. Finally, we want to think about how our zone pathing affects our inventory management such that we're not just leaving currency that drops out in the world there in the world without picking it up if it's convenient for us to do so because we don't have space in our inventory. In other words, the goal of act pathing is to optimize our ability to efficiently, consistently, and quickly clear an act through balancing various competing considerations. To that end, like I was saying, we want to try and balance the amount of times we go to town to prevent unnecessary town trips while still allowing for us to get power spikes from the town trips that we will be making. We also want to make sure we path in such a way that we can XP efficiently while we minimize the amount of time that we're not progressing forward in the zone, while also sort of optimizing our ability to manage our inventory to make sure we're getting the currency that we need through how we path. Finally, really at the bottom of it, like, pathing is one of the foundational pieces that's going to help you speedrun more consistently because it's another thing you don't really have to think about, and it's just something where you can plan around what you're doing so that you can generate the currency and know what your game plan is and when you can expect various things in a particular act. So with that being said, let's go over how we want to path through Act 1. So Act 1, as a general matter, is pretty linear in its pathing options, and there are not necessarily a ton of options in different pathing styles you may be able to take. This is nice for us for a variety of reasons, but generally speaking, the best path for like a fresh act run, or a speed run in particular, is going to be as follows. So we're going to have a number of town trips that we have here. The ones that are highlighted in magenta are going to be relatively quick town trips where we might just be selling something to a vendor or picking up a gem and leaving. The ones that are highlighted in cyan here are going to be longer town trips just because they're going to involve more activity and complexity because we're going to have more items in inventory. We're going to need to buy some gems, or we're going to need to do some recipe crafting. So on average, they'll probably take a little longer than the other town trips that are highlighted in magenta. That's the first thing I wanted to mention. The second thing is I'm going to divide our pathing into terms of how we're doing our towns. So you can see like the first, second, third, fourth, fifth town, because it provides a nice little segment to think about the overall pathing, because we really want to organize how we path around when we expect to return to town and sort of what our quest state is in the act itself. So, as I was saying, our our first step is our first town here, and this is pretty much enforced. There's no way around it. If you want to play the game, you're going to have to take this first town. So our first town is going to be Strand, and we'll enter town from there. Our second town will essentially be heading into coast. We want to make sure we get the waypoint here. We'll go to Mudflats. We'll do Submerged. We'll get the waypoint in Submerged. We'll waypoint back to coast, go to Tidal Island, and then we'll log after killing Hailrake to do our second town. And during our second town, we will make sure that we essentially pick up a bunch of gems that will be our sort of bedrock for the rest of our progress, because we'll get access to our first set of travel gems, and we'll get access to better supports here. So this town might take a little longer because you have to interact with multiple vendors, and you might need to buy some gems or items still if you're missing, say for example, like a 3-link for your Onslaught setup. Our third town is essentially, we're going to port out to Submerge. From Submerge, we will travel through the ledge to the climb, and then we'll get the lower prison, and we'll get that waypoint. We'll waypoint back to town so we can use the portal that we dropped in Submerged. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. You want to portal in Submerged for Dweller. It's in the note right here. Once we use that portal back to Submerge, we'll head to Flooded Depths to kill Dweller. Once Dweller's dead, we'll log for the third town. Now, the third town can be pretty quick if you're playing melee, because you're not really going to be looking to do a wand or scepter craft at all here. So it is essentially just picking up your skill gem and picking up the passive point from Tarklay. If you want, actually on melee, you can skip, or any class really, you can skip picking up that passive point from Tarklay until after you come back for the fourth town trip. And I'll talk about that a little further, but it's essentially because in a lot of builds, you don't necessarily need the passive point at that point because it doesn't really do much extra for you for Brutus. I will typically go pick up the passive point anyways, just because that's what I'm used to doing. But say, for example, Keldorn in his speedruns will typically wait to get that extra passive point until the fourth town, when you have to go to Tarklay anyways to get your level 10 movement skill from killing Brutus. So let's talk about this fourth town here. The fourth town will essentially be a mini segment where you're going to end up going back to town to get your level 10 skill gem and just to sell the items that you get from Brutus, because Brutus drops a ton of items. So this one will be a pretty simple one where we just go to lower, upper, and then after we kill Brutus, we'll log out. And we do this because we get the waypoint from Prisoner's Gate after killing Brutus immediately, so we can just log out pretty safely instead of wasting the time of running through the Brutus room to get to the waypoint in Prisoner's Gate ourselves. Next, we have sort of our fifth town, which will be after we get to Merveil's Caverns. We'll go to Prisoner's Gate from town, Ship Graveyard Cave. Then we'll go to the Cavern of Wrath waypoint. We will go use that waypoint to go back to Ship Graveyard, and we'll go complete Fairgraves. And then after Fairgraves, we'll log for our fifth and probably final town in Act 1. Now, one thing to note here is sometimes you're going to get a late Fairgraves that's going to be closer to the Cavern of Wrath than to the waypoint. In that circumstance, you're going to want to do Fairgraves before going to the Cavern of Wrath waypoint, meaning that instead of logging at Fairgraves, you will do Fairgraves and then travel to the Cavern of Wrath waypoint and log there. One final note is really thinking about, you might have a sixth town where you log after Merveil. This is a little less efficient than going to Act 2, but the reason why you'd want to do this optional sixth towns is, say for example, you have some critical gem that you've missed from Nessa due to oversight or not having currency that would speed you up in Act 2. So you want to go back and get that rather than leave it until you naturally path back from Act 2. Otherwise, you want to not log after Merveil because it is faster, definitely, to just path to Act 2 town, instead of logging after Merveil. So, in other words, only log after Merveil if you really need something from, like some item or skill gem from Nessa that you haven't been able to pick up yet. So here's a list of like the essential waypoints that you might want to collect in Act 1. So you want to get Coast because we'll be porting back to Coast from Mudflats. You want to get Submerged because you'll be porting back to Submerged after you do Tidal Island, and you'll use a Submerged waypoint to go back to the coast. You want Lower Prison because if you're doing Dweller, you need to get back to Lower Prison efficiently. You will auto get Prisoner's Gate from killing Brutus, which is convenient because you can just log after Brutus. You, in the vast majority of cases, will want Ship Graveyard because you will port back to Ship Graveyard after Caverns of Wrath. However, in some circumstances where, say, for example, you have a late Fairgraves, you might not need to pick up the Ship Graveyard waypoint. But in almost all circumstances where I think a late Fairgraves is possible, you're going to be pathing right through the area where the waypoint is anyways, so you just might want to pick it up. And then you're going to want the Cavern of Wrath waypoint so you can make the pathing after Fairgraves more efficient, so we can just start off in Mervale's Caverns and go kill Mervale after we've logged from Fairgraves. All the other waypoints are optional. You can pick them up really if you want. It's not really a major time loss to pick them up. It is definitely a very minor time loss, but for some of them, like Ledge Stay, for example, you're running right by them anyways. I wouldn't really go out of my way to pick up something like the Climb waypoint, but that's just, how I think about doing these waypoints. So let's talk about some questions or tips in Act 1 pathing. What'll happen a lot is in speedrunning, sometimes you'll end up not having a portal for Dweller. This is a bit of a weird circumstance because you should always get a portal because Hailrake is guaranteed to drop a portal. So if you don't have a portal for Dweller, it means you either forgot to put it up, which, that happens. It happens literally all the time. And it happens to the best of us. And there's also the fact that you might have sold the portal to be able to afford some item. So in that circumstance, what do we do? Well, you're going to go back and do Dweller as soon as you can equip your level 10 movement skill, and it's at like a good point to do so. So for example, if you've just killed Brutus and you're level 10, go pick up your level 10 movement skill and go do Dweller right away. And we want to do it right away because we can still get decent XP from doing it. And we have a faster movement skill that we can use because the level 10 movement skills are typically faster traversal skills than the level 4 movement skills. If you're not level 10 after killing Brutus and returning to Prisoner's Gate, you can do it once you get to the Cavern of Wrath waypoint, because again, you'll still get some XP. It might be a little less than if you were able to do it right after Brutus, but it'll be a good time to do it still. And the Submerged Passage Zone probably won't have reset by that point if you're moving fast enough. So you can sort of save yourself some zone navigation by knowing where Dweller should be, relatively speaking, since you've already explored the zone. Now, in terms of potential time loss from not having a portal, it's probably about 10 to 20 seconds, depending on the submerged layout that you have. But I think as, just a matter of practice, you want to have the portal whenever you can, but do not be afraid to sell the portal, especially if selling that portal is going to get that little bit of extra currency you need to get MS boots or a 3L set up for Onslaught. Another thing that commonly happens is sometimes you just might whiff on finding the lower prison trial, or you just might forget to do it. So what I advocate doing is going back immediately after Brutus, or doing it at the Cavern of Wrath waypoint, for a lot of the same reasons why we might go back and do Dweller immediately after Brutus or at the Cavern of Wrath waypoint is that we'll have a faster travel skill, typically, because we'll be around level 10 at this point. And the zone will still be uncovered such that, we'll be able to navigate quickly. And, as I mentioned before, we'll still be sort of in the appropriate level range for XP. Another question that might come up is, why not Tidal Island before Mudflats? So essentially the answer for this is that by going to Tidal Island first, you have an extra town trip / load screen that you don't really need. This is especially the case because the Quicksilver Flask now always requires level 4, and you're not going to have level 4 from doing Coast and Tidal Island unless, you got like Omega Lost and Coast and cleared every mob on accident. That's like the only circumstance where I could see you getting level 4 from Tidal Island and Coast alone. It's just generally not an optimal choice, because with the Quicksilver being level 4 and that, you know, it requiring an additional town trip, you just don't get much benefit for doing Tidal Island first, and it's also less XP efficient to do Tidal Island first versus doing Mudflats first. So, in other words, we do Mudflats first before Tidal Island because it's a lot faster and it's a lot more convenient, and essentially allows us to get the level 4 power spike by the time we're done with Hillrake. We'll go back to town. Typically, if we do Mudflats then Tidal Island, we'll make sure we're in town at level 4 such that we'll be able to equip our skills and get our Quicksilver and just sort of blast Submerged Passage as best as possible. So here's another question that might come up, which is, you know, what if I don't find Ship Graveyard Cave on the way to the Cavern of Wrath? In this circumstance, pretty much in all cases, I will try and go back to Ship Graveyard and find it before the zone disappears, so I don't have to worry about where it is relatively located. There is a couple circumstances where I'll just keep pathing on. I mentioned this in an alternative Fairgraves pathing video that I did elsewhere, but essentially, if I don't need a level 12 gem and I plan on killing all the bandits, there is a pathing route through Act 1 and Act 2 where you don't worry about getting the Fairgrave skill point until essentially you're returning to Act 1 from the Way Forward skill point in Western Forest. That I do that rarer and rarer these days, but typically I think the best practice really is to, if you miss Ship Graveyard Cave, is to try and find it right away so you can go to Fairgraves and then get your skill point as you normally would, because it encourages consistency and you don't have weird gaps in XP because you're missing essentially 2 zones of XP. And when I say 2 zones, I'm talking about the Ship Graveyard Cave itself, and then the Fairgraves event. Well, the Fairgraves event is not a zone in itself. It gives a boatload of XP. Like, it gives like half a level of XP if you're around like level 11, which is excellent, which is what you might get from just traversing a zone typically. Here's a little more of like a specialized question, which is, Marauder doesn't get a level 4 skill gem that's usable for travel skills. And what I mean by that is Frostbrink and Dash both require 16, Frostbrink requires 16 intelligence and Dash requires 16 dexterity. Marauder only has a base 14 dex and a base 14 intelligence, so it can't use either Frostbrink or Dash without finding some source of attributes, either through gear, such as an amulet, or through the passive tree. There are 2 sort of main ways to circumvent this problem on Marauder, and one involves a bit of different pathing. So what you can do on Marauder is, instead of going from Submerged all the way to Lower Prison and then back to Dweller to do Flooded Depths, is that at the ledge waypoint, you can port back to town and take the Dweller portal to go kill Dweller and have your town trip then. And then what you would do is you would skip sort of the Lower Prison town trip, so you'd miss out on that 8 gem, and just collect the 8 gem after you kill Brutus, and you have to go back for your 4th town trip anyways. And the reason why you would do it this way is, ideally, you would be at least level 6 by the time you kill Dweller, because you'd have a shot at getting an attribute amulet for dexterity or intelligence from Nessa, assuming that you're at least level 6 and you have a transmute. Now, this isn't guaranteed because Nessa kind of sucks and she doesn't necessarily always sell the attribute amulets you want. And there's also the crappy chance of her selling the attribute amulet you want, but it being magic, which costs a chance orb instead of a transmute, which means you might be screwed out of doing this. So the sort of this alternative pathing from Marauder doesn't always make sense because you might not guarantee that you get that amulet. Nonetheless, it's still a good option. Typically, I prefer doing this second sort of choice, which is you do the standard zone pathing like every other class does, but you alter your passive point pathing a little bit. So you sort of take the attribute nodes that are not like the physical damage nodes or the the life nodes starting paths from Marauder, and instead you take like those plus 10 strength nodes. And you can see on the tree that by level 6, if you take those plus 10 strength nodes, you'll be able to pick up a plus 10 dex or plus 10 intelligence node, depending on whether you took the upper or lower path, and then you'll be able to slot on your movement skill then. That's typically what I'll do. It makes your early game a little bit weaker, but it ends up balancing out in the end, and it's guaranteed versus sort of the alternative pathing that you do on Marauder to try and get a attribute amulet. Finally, another question you might have is, why no fetid pool? And this might be more of a beginner-oriented question, which is totally cool. And the answer is fetid pool just takes too long. And there's no real benefit to doing it because you're going to get better XP efficiency by skipping it anyways. And you don't really need the passive respec points for any reason typically in campaign unless like you've done something massively wrong with your passive tree. Or you spec like the wrong ascendancy and like it's omega bad for you to have the wrong ascendancy versus you having the right ascendancy. Typically, I will not even do fetid pool until after I've completed the campaign, and sometimes even then, like I'll just forget to do it the entirety of a league on a particular character. So yeah, this has been a video about Act 1 pathing, and hopefully it's been helpful for you to have a better approach to how you path Act 1 and to understand why this pathing will be the best foundation for your Act 1 times. Alright, thank you for watching, and take care.